Hey, this is Brent Leary. Oh my goodness, StreamYard is actually working today. It actually went live and it told me it went live, and I didn't have to wait for 30 seconds for somebody else to tell me, hey, you're live before I knew I was live. Anyway, I've been really looking forward to this. This is my first few good minutes of the week. And it's going to be a great few minutes. I can already tell you that because of the gentleman that will be joining me. It's the first time I've had him on a few good minutes, but of course, he's well known not only on PPM or on the CRM players, but he had a show called No BS with Bob. And of course, he's an industry pioneer. And so, before I officially bring him on and we get into the conversation, because there's just a lot to talk about with him, let's see, I think I got something Friday. That's right. So Friday, I'm doing a little housekeeping. I always say house cleaning, and it really jacks me up. I think I got it right this time. Some housekeeping. Anyway, so I got a new show that I am hosting for the small business trends folks. They're calling it the Small Business Breakdown. And basically, Small Business Trends has been a fixture in the small business space for and advice, information. I think it's going on 21 years, and they get millions of visitors a month, and it's all around small business advice, help, everything. So they put out a ton of articles every week. And this show is going to, at the end of the week on Fridays at noon Eastern, just pick out some of the topics that really hit home for that week and bring together a group of folks who have basically lived their professional lives in the small business space, and they're experts and they're passionate and they have opinions on a lot of what's going on. So we bring them together. I throw out some topics, I get out of their way, and then let's talk about it. We did the first one last week. People really liked it, and so we're going to see where it goes, see what happens over the next couple of weeks and months. But I know these four people that I'm there with. So Leland McFarland is heading things over at Small Biz Trends. Eva Taylor is the queen of do-it-yourself marketing. Ramon Ray has like so many titles, I can't explain them all at this point, but he's very passionate about small business. And my buddy and my co-host on a show I do later on Fridays called Pass the Mic is John Colderice Lawson. He's an e-commerce AI expert. So check that out. And then one last thing, next Wednesday, I did a show I think it was at the beginning of this year with David Singer over at Variant. They're doing some really interesting things with AI, and they're doing something with this Flex bot. But what they're kind of doing is taking the Uber model and kind of trying to figure out if that'll work in the contact center. So, what you do with Uber, you call it up when you need it. They get somebody to take you to where you want to go, and you do it all through the app. And so they're kind of looking at how they can leverage kind of that technology and that business model to make it easier for contact center agents to work at times that actually work for them as well as work for the customer, and bring them together in that way instead of the traditional 9 to 5. You sign up for this and you work that. So we're going to get a kind of a follow-up to see how things are going with that next week. So that's just two things to look out for on PPM. But right now, I want you to look out for this conversation with, like I said, it was a CRM pioneer legend. He's been a part of some of the earliest CRM applications and platforms, and all the way up until a few years ago, he was entrenched at a lot of the different vendors that like Siebel, like Microsoft, like SAP, like Salesforce. So he has a unique perspective, and he is really good about sharing that unique perspective. And he's also a huge Buffalo Bills fan. He is Bob Stutz. Hey, Bob, thanks for joining me.
Hey, how you doing, Brett?
As I say, man, I look at that scenery, and I don't know how you even have time to talk about this stuff. I'd be just sitting in my backyard looking at that scenery and just letting dreams go, man. It looks great.
I do spend a lot of time doing that.
Awesome. And first of all, thanks for taking time. This is the first time I actually had you on a few good minutes, but of course you're a fixture on PPN with CRM players and with your show. And I believe it's coming back at some point in time. So we're looking forward to that. But
After the summer's over in September, maybe.
yeah, when you can pull yourself away from that view, man. Great. Oh, before we get into the industry stuff, so I got to ask you, what kind of year are you looking forward to with the Bills?
I don't know. It's hard to say. I think we'll see in the first regular season game of the year. I think that's when we'll see whether because it's sort of been a rebuild year for the Bills this year in a lot of ways, right? And so, new team dynamics, new people. I think it will be interesting to see how it starts off. Whether I think Josh Allen, whether his head's in the game or whether it's in the clouds again. I mean, the telltale sign will be whether those number of interceptions actually comes down dramatically this year, right?
Yeah. I'm thinking, they got rid of their lead wide receiver, and maybe because he was causing a little tension among the ranks there. But it's going to be AFC East is actually a tough division, man. You got
you look at the teams in the AFC East this year, right? You got the Jets, who nobody knows how they're going to come out, but look, if they have a healthy quarterback, there's no telling how things are going to turn out there. And then you have you got Miami, who is definitely a powerhouse, and they're not going away anywhere. No telling what New England will be like this year. Hopefully they'll be like shit, but
we can both agree on that one for sure. But all right, so let's get into a little bit now. I was looking at an article that came out on let me do this. Let's get this view here. I have a Seeking Alpha subscription. They put out a lot of great stuff, and one thing that really caught my attention is what this kind of analysis that Stone Fox Capital did on C3. And it was that top bullet point that caught my attention. C3 is showing signs of growth turning the corner with a return to 20% plus rates and a shift to a consumption model paying off. And that's the part that got my attention, because I know you are big on consumption. And so when I dug into
I've been advocating for consumption for 5 years, right? I mean, I have been like the lone voice talking about this, and I'm glad my buddy and over at C3 listened. So, but look, to be perfectly honest, right? I mean, I think consumption, when you go to a consumption model and get away from subscription, right? Because subscription is just another form of perpetual license at the end of the day. It replaced perpetual license, but it really is a perpetual license in a lot of ways, even to the point where, a lot of the SaaS vendors are charging for, upgraded support, right? Well, that's your maintenance fee at the end of the day, right? So you're really, you never got away from that perpetual license, just called it something different. But with consumption model, I think the advantage to a consumption model is this. If you really are the best in what you do and you switch to a consumption model, yes, there's a time period where that it's going to affect your revenue stream for a while until it builds. But if your product is really good, people are going to use it more. And I think this is what C3 has realized, right? They have a great product. I know a lot of those guys at Apple, him and I worked together for a long time, Tom Siebel, these guys, they know what they're doing, but I really believe, they've always predicated themselves on building great product. And I think if you have a great product and you go to a consumption-based model, I think you'll actually do better in the long run than with a subscription model.
So let's look at that a little bit, because it looks like when C3 made the transition, they were about $86.6 million. It took them about 7 quarters after they moved to the consumption model to get back to that level. is that a sign that it is a way of the future, that it's you might have to take a little pain in the beginning, but really 7 quarters, that's not a huge amount of time before you actually start to see the benefits of it.
No, and I think that, you know, the true advantage of a consumption-based model is you actually know people are using your software at the end of the day. Let's be really clear. Most of the big companies in the SaaS space have a lot of shelfware in the cloud. They sell a ton of licenses. And guess what?
They don't use
them. Nobody's using them. Right. And that's why I say it's very much like the perpetual license model was, right? You sell a bunch of these things, but you may only use 20% of what you bought at the end of the day. And you have a bunch of stuff sitting in the cloud where, you know, just think of the SFA situation as a good example. You have 2,000 salespeople. So you buy a SaaS license for every one of those people, right? I won't mention any vendors, but let's say if you add in all the upgrades and everything else, you may be paying $1,000 a month per user. And that user is only using it maybe one time a week, maybe once every 2 weeks, maybe right before the month ends or right before the quarter ends, because they have to put all their stuff into the system. So what are you really paying for? Right? I mean, if you have a product that people really want to use, that is really good to use, simple to use, easy to use, then you're going to see that consumption increase, because that's the true sign that you have built something that really works at the end of the day.
How disruptive would that be to the overall industry? Because the way that they rank what percentage of share you have in the industry is based on the sales of the units, not on the consumption. I mean, how big of disruption would that be to the overall industry if now, you know, the leaders are based on the consumption levels and not on how much they sell?
Well, I think it's a mindset shift, right? People have to get out of this, you know, I mean, look, the reality is that the hype around companies, and, you know, and look, I don't want to belittle any company because they all have what they do, and they, you know, but take a Salesforce, take a Microsoft, take an SAP, right? You look at these companies, right? And look, they all have these big earnings and everything else, right? It's a big hype at the end of the day. But what are they really doing to keep driving that revenue? Well, they're going in every quarter at the end of the quarter and beating the living piss out of their customers to buy more add-ons, to do, right? I mean, that's not a true sign of a good product at the end of the day. That's a true sign that you have a hell of a freaking sales force that can go in and do that, right? But how long does that last, right? Look at some of the companies who really started with that model, like the Oracles of the world, right? Sooner or later, it turns on you. Sooner and later, it becomes counterproductive, right? Customers get pissed, they get dissatisfied, right? But what if you really built a truly great product that salespeople really wanted to use, that they did use every single day, that you know, was a joy to use every day? Well, guess what? Your consumption would go through the roof, right? Instead of having your assistant put your stuff in once a week or once every 2 weeks or once a month or once, right? I mean, that's the reality of this, right? It sort of is you'd have to shift the whole mindset, right? And you have to start believing that what you build is really good, really useful. People will use it, and they'll use it every single day, right? And I think C3, you know, the beauty there is, look, they have a powerful product. And, you know, and I think when companies start to use it, right, and use it more, and it's sort of an enticement, right? And it sort of makes you as a software vendor have to really be on point about what you're building, why you're building it, and how is that actually going to help solve a problem that a company is facing, right? Not that you're coming out with some new bullshit because it's the latest hype cycle in the industry, right? but something that's really going to solve a problem at the end of the day, right? That's why I think consumption is really, I've always been a big believer in it, and I do believe that yes, it's hard for big vendors to switch to that at this junction, right? They'd really have to, they'd have to do some serious looks at that, right? And some vendors may be surprised that if they did switch to a consumption model, they'd find that their product isn't as good as they hype it to be at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And right. And I think that's the big fear that you would see from a lot of the big vendors at the end of the day, is that, is their product really as good as they say it is, right? Because look, we all know there's a lot of shelfware out there in the cloud. And I don't care which vendor it is.
That's a really good way to just put it out there like that. By the way, Donnie is saying hello there to you.
Hey, Danny.
Let's do this. I saw another thing on Seeking Alpha that I thought would be interesting. They did kind of this ask their analysts which cloud giant is best positioned to dominate AI. And they're talking, kind of at the foundational levels, because you have your Amazons, your Googles, and all those. But let me ask you, from a industry enterprise apps perspective, which cloud giants or which of those folks do you think are best positioned to, dominate AI from their perspective?
I think it's hard to say, right? So if you look at the cloud players, a lot of them are in a good position to really take advantage, right? So if you're an enterprise and you've got all your stuff, hosted on Google Cloud or on Azure or on Amazon, you're going to take advantage of those services, those AI services that they have, and you're going to build on them and build so that it benefits you at the end of the day, right? I don't see right now, I don't think there's any real dominant player in the cloud space. I think Microsoft has definitely a better advantage in a lot of ways. They've been at it a very long time. I think, plus they are a technology company at the end of the day. And by the way, they're a company that is driven on consumption. Consumption is a big part of and you could see that with Azure, right? They were focused on the consumption aspect, right? And that was very important for them, right? I think if you look at enterprise application players, because that's where I think you have to differentiate, right? You're always going to have the big players like the Googles and the Amazons and the Microsofts who, are in a lot of ways technology companies, especially Google and Microsoft, right? Amazon is a technology company, but it's different from a Microsoft or a Google, right? But if you look at the enterprise players in the space, enterprise application players, the Salesforces, the Oracles, the SAPs, right? And to some small extent, Microsoft, because they are a business. They do have that business. They have AX. They have CRM. They have assets there, right? But I think you have to look at the bigger ones. You have to look at the SAPs of the world, the Salesforces, the Oracles, right? I actually don't believe any of them are going to dominate in this space because I think they look at it the wrong fucking way again. Right. They, instead of really understanding what it can do and refactoring what they've built, everybody just starts plugging this stuff in, right? They Gen AI this, Gen AI that, Gen AI this, Gen AI that. I think even you hear it from some of the big players out there and the customers, right, who are saying, yeah, this stuff isn't really where it's right. It's not there, right? It's not ready for prime time, right? I think those vendors have to get to a point where they stop trying to force feed into these old platforms and start thinking of rebuilding in a new way, right? that takes AI from the very heart and soul and center of everything and build the applications from that perspective, especially from the data up and not from the UX down, which is what a lot of these vendors do at the end of the day, right? Because it is about the data, right? And look, it's not easy. It's hard, right? When you have to really think about that data and think about how you're going to put those data structures together for the future, right? It's a whole different way of looking at things. And I think, I do think the big vendors need to look. These platforms are all old they're on, right? They've been around forever and ever, right? The reality is yes, they work. Yes, they're, they basically get the job done. If you look at any of them, they're all they get it done, right? Now, usually there's a lot of customization that has to be done, right? But I do think that the vendors need to start thinking about this very differently. They need to start thinking about how they build new apps that truly are, AI first,
right?
And not just a plugin at the end of the day to their existing platform.
What do you think about ServiceNow and the way that they seem to have really embraced it and gotten in pretty early on with NVIDIA to form this partnership where they're actually going to have, be able to do their own AI and training based on the technology partnership they have with NVIDIA, but they're not necessarily depending fully on third-party LLMs to kind of do things, but they actually got early on embedded with NVIDIA, and now they're starting to do things on their own.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think ServiceNow is an interesting company, right? From where they started to where they're heading, right? I think they have a lot more leeway to do things in a different way than some of the other vendors, right? Because they're not as entrenched in the way that if you take a Salesforce is entrenched, right? Across so many different processes running the front office, right? I think that ServiceNow has, in some ways, an advantage there because I think they have a lot more flexibility to do things that some of the other vendors don't have to do. Now, the question is, can they actually do that, right? And the NVIDIA partnership, look, I don't put a whole lot of, I mean, look, everybody and their brother has a partnership with NVIDIA nowadays, right? It's like, fuck, what's going to come of those partnerships actually at the end of the day, right? It's no different than when everybody went out and did partnerships with Amazon, and then everybody did partnerships with Azure and did Google Cloud. And, so the question really becomes what value, right? Look how many of the vendors did partnerships with IBM and Watson, right? What became of that?
Jeez.
Right? I can't see a whole lot that became of that at the end of the day, So I really, I mean, I'm hoping that, somebody like a ServiceNow who has a little more flexibility actually starts to rethink these things. I actually believe that ServiceNow is in a position where they could transform and rethink and sort of reimagine service in a very different way, right? They have some very good people there. A lot of them I know who I think if they really thought about it and don't fall back into those old patterns of what is service, right? But think about service in a very different way, right? In a new paradigm. I think they could actually do some, make some serious headway in the industry. Now, look, it's going to take a lot of work. You look at where Salesforce is in the industry. I mean, they're so far ahead, right? I mean, let's be clear. Once you go over that 20% dominance, right, and you just keep going, it becomes pretty hard to catch that player, right? No different with SAP, right? I mean, once SAP went over that threshold, right, they just keep going, right? And there's no other ERP vendor in the space that's even going to come close to them, right? It's going to take a long time for that to happen. Unless somebody comes out with something that is so dynamic, so easy to implement, so easy to configure, that is self-healing type of application, it's just not going to happen. And that's why I say that I think the vendors really have to spend some money to really start thinking about how they reimagine these applications in a true AI world, not just plugging AI into what's already there, but reimagining those applications in a very different way. Right.
Yeah. So the vendors, like you said, they've been around for a long time. They're very entrenched, from infrastructure to the way that they do things. And they have shareholders who are, some of them go to the the activism route. So they have a lot of things to consider. Given all that, and given what you just said about, what you really think it'll take to be as successful and as innovative as you could possibly be with this new technology, what are the what do you see actually happening? Do you see the entrenched vendors being able to make these kind of foundational shifts that they would be needing in order to get to that point? Do you see a new, very lean and mean, smaller, nimbler operation that may have the potential to do something? Or are we going to just kind of be stuck feeling like we did once, the cloud came out, and then, email came out, and then mobile came out, and we thought it was going to change everything, and it changed certain things, but not everything. And now we're with that kind of same point with AI. Do we actually just go back into the usual kind of rotation, or is there an opportunity to actually go to the next level and not continually be in this kind of,
I think there's opportunity, but that really depends on the vendors really, biting off the fact that they have to think differently. They have to rebuild, right? What they have today is not going to last them for the next 5-10 years, right? And just like, and I always, if you think about the rise of Salesforce, right? Well, look, I was one of the key bodies who suffered from that rise of Salesforce, and why did that happen? Well, because Siebel was slow to change, right? Siebel got too confident. Siebel got, our platform was good. We believed that it was the best, that nobody could ever. And by the way, still today, I mean, the functionality that was in Siebel, no other CRM vendor has ever matched that. Not even Salesforce has come close. But what Salesforce did do is they came with a product that was lighter, easier to implement, easier to configure, fast to get up and running, right? But now they've become the giant in the industry, slow to implement, hard to implement, right? Lots of failures, lots of long implementation cycles, right? And I do think the industry is ripe for somebody to come along who can reimagine and think of this in a very different way. And I do think that this next generation of entrepreneurs, right? I think it's their generation to be able to come and really disrupt the Salesforces and the SAPs of the world, right? Because they think differently. My generation, actually, me and my good friend Jujar Singh were having a discussion about this over the weekend, which was, our generation, our big thing was, and if I think about all the amazing, IP that we gave to big companies like Microsoft, like Siebel, like Salesforce, SAP, right? I mean, this newer generation of engineers and entrepreneurs, they think differently. Their goal is not to work for a big company and help big companies to become more successful, right? that was always my thing, right? Work for big companies, help them. You know, I think sometimes I look back and I have no regrets about it, right? But when I look back at all the things that I contributed to this industry and all the IP that I came up with that became part of products across the board, if I had gone and started my own company, I'd be in a very different place right now. But I have no complaints because the industry has been very good to me, right? But you know, I do think this new generation thinks differently, right? They have more of an entrepreneurial spirit than I think, you know, my generation or even your generation had. You know, I think that they think differently. Their goal is not to work for a big company and progress. Their goal is to do something that changes the world, changes the industry. And I do think somebody will come along and be able to build the next generation of enterprise applications in a way that truly takes advantage of AI to its fullest, right? And examples of that are like, if you look at the healthcare industry and the medical industry, right? Look at the advances that people have made with AI in being able to diagnose diseases and being able to, right? I mean, you think about it, it's revolutionizing the medical industry, right? The fact that you can download an app, now I don't agree with paying $6.99 a week for the app, but you can download the app and you can take a picture of a mole on your skin and it literally can tell you what that is and whether you need to go to a doctor or whether it's nothing to worry about. Just think about that, right? I mean, the advances that AI have made in the medical industry, we have not seen those kind of advances in the what I would call the enterprise application space at all. Not at all, right? I mean, you look at some of the stuff that vendors are coming out with AI, and you go, oh yeah, okay, no big deal at the end of the day. How is that really going to change, right? Yeah, does it save me a little more time? Possibly, you know, but also there's too much hype that comes from the vendors in the space, right? Like recently there was this company based, I think they're out of Oakland, California. They're in the HR space. And they came out with the stupidest freaking thing I think I've ever seen, which was onboarding digital assets, right? Like, give me a fucking break.
Yeah.
Right.
Let's put it like this. That post was taken down by that CEO because she got so much flack.
Well, but the reality is what, see, that was somebody trying to take advantage of the hype and the marketing hype around AI and not really thinking about the consequences of that at the end of the day, right? Machines are not people and they never will be people. And you have to treat them that they aren't people, right? It's a tool like any other tool, right? But if you think about advances in AI in other industries like manufacturing, medical, you look at the wonders that have happened in those industries, but then you look at the enterprise application space and you go, you know, it's just not there. We're not even... but it's because we keep trying to force feed stuff into old platforms versus rethinking about how we could do things differently at the end of the day.
And it feels like also right now there's this big, well, I'll say growing discussion around ROI. And I think it was kind of kicked off with this Gen AI stuff because of the hype. And now people are starting to ask about ROI. And then a lot of the emphasis now on AI seems to be on the cost reduction side of the house. And that might be, you know, because of what's going on with the uncertain economy or what have you. But I want to play this clip from Lawrence Buchanan, and I want to get your take on it because he says something that I don't necessarily hear enough about this whole area. So let me play this for you.
Has been challenging for most clients in most industry sectors. I know that's a real overgeneralization. I think it's been quite tempting for a lot of the C-suite to say, AI is here. Why don't we just rip cost out of marketing, sales, and service? Because AI can do that. AI can transform your content supply chain. AI can, replace some of your call center agents. Let's just use this technology lever to take out cost. Sure, we can drive efficiency, we can bank some of the easy savings, but what fundamentally do we stand for with our customers? How are we building enduring relationships?
I like that because there's this ROI discussion. I started calling it the instead of Gen AI, it's called the Gen ROI discussion. It is so focused now on what he said, cost reduction, trying to find the efficiencies. And you kind of understand that because that happens with every new technological revolution. Everything always starts with how can we use it to do things cheaper and faster and more efficient. I get that. But some of the things you're talking about, it goes way beyond finding cost efficiency. You're talking about doing things that have never been done before, and the possibilities that's where this stuff, the potential is there. Is there an appetite for that yet? Are we still so entrenched in using this from a pure efficiency reduction, cost reduction angle, as opposed to looking out and saying, look, this is what we can do, and what are our customers saying? Because if that's all you're looking at, what about us? How are you using this stuff for our benefit, not just your benefit?
Yeah, I mean, look, Lawrence, I've known Lawrence a long time. He makes a valid point, right? I do think that, people are looking at AI in our space more around cost efficiencies versus, what's the end effect for the customer? What's the end effect for the process at the end of the day, right? Are we making things more effective, more efficient, easier to do business with us? Or are we just trying to take more cost out of the business at the end of the day? And I would say the reality is it's all about taking cost out of the business. I don't think people are, and that's why I say you have to reimagine this stuff if you want to do it the other way, right? And I don't think people's heads are there. I don't think businesses' heads are there. Businesses look at, like they've looked at every other freaking, technology advancement as a way to save money, as a way to cut costs, right? And I think that companies, it's sort of a tough one because on one hand, you want to think that people want to do good, right? And that companies want to do good for their people, for their customers, but the reality is most companies don't still, and it's still about the bottom line and the almighty dollar euro at the end of the day. And the reality is I really truly think, even though companies say, oh, we value our people at the end of the day, I think they've really forgotten that people are the most valuable asset that any company has. AI is not going to replace people at the end of the day. AI is not going to give you a better relationship with your customer at the end of the day. It may make things a little more efficient in some ways. Like, look, I have to say, some of the bots that are out there nowadays are efficient, right? Especially if you need to change a shipping address or you need to do some simple things, right? But where it breaks down is the minute you go beyond the boundaries of what that bot is capable of, and then it says, oh, let me connect you to a real person. Right? And then here we go. It all comes back to people at the end of the day. It all comes back to, look, this industry has always been about relationships, right? There was a reason CRM became so big, right? Because it's always been about relationships, right? And how do you grow that relationship, right? How do you grow your share of wallet with that customer at the end of the day? Well, I'm a firm believer that personal relationships play a lot in that, right? And you can see it even in service industry, right? You call up a company, you have a problem, right? How it's handled on the other end really determines in this day and age whether you're going to continue to do business with that company, or whether you're going to go somewhere else and find another company to do business with. right? And I do think that it plays an important part. But I think a lot of companies look at AI only as the cost saving thing at the end of the day, right? And to Lawrence's point, oh yeah, let's rip apart, let's cut people in marketing because now you can generate decks without having to have a person do it, right? And that's where I think we in our industry we're not thinking about AI the right way. We're thinking about it from that cost savings perspective and an efficiency perspective, rather than how do we turn the industry upside down and build true smart applications that can take advantage of this technology that the machine offers at the end of the day, right? But that's hard because that's a lot of hard thinking, because like I said, you have to really think about those data structures and how you're going to bring that together and how you're going to really utilize that to then generate what I would call fluid applications that really are based on what you want to do and not some freaking pre-described application that you're stuck with forever and ever, right? But that is adaptable, right? And by the way, it is possible. The technology is there to do that, but it's not easy, and it's going to take companies to really rethink how would you do these things. If you were to rethink SFA, right? How would you rethink those processes, right? How could you build a new SFA product that really helped the salesperson at the end of the day, right? I mean, truly helped the salesperson, right? You always see these movies, right, where you see where people have thought about what the capabilities of AI actually could do, right? But the reality is you don't see that in practicality, right? That's the biggest problem we face, right? Yeah. Look, you're in this day and age, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, even 20 years ago, you were limited by what technology could do. But in this day and age, you're only limited by your imagination, because the technology is there basically to be able to do anything. It's really your imagination and whether you're willing to go beyond the boundaries and the norms to think differently and build something differently at the end of the day. And that's where I think big companies struggle. I think they struggle with being able to do that.
So last thing I'd like to ask is, you have been at the forefront of a lot of these applications and platforms, working inside, at companies like Siebel and all the rest. But now you've been kind of removed from being in the mix in the middle of that, from working at these top vendors, to kind of having an ability to look at things sort of like the outside looking in. What kind of perspective has that provided you about where things are going? Because you spent so many years in there building these applications. Now you've had a couple of years to be like, okay, I don't have to be, worried about it at this level. I can actually take it all in now. So what is that ability to do that? What does that add to, how you look at the industry and where it's going?
Well, it's allowed me to actually look at it from a different perspective, right? Which is to be able to look at it from the outside looking in, but also be able to do a lot of research and talk to different people and different, customers in different industries, and with a very different lens at the end of the day, right? And I think you and I were talking before, but I guess the biggest realization and the stark realization for me about this industry is that it's fucking evil at the end of the day.
Yeah, I remember that.
When you're in the cusp of this, you don't fully comprehend and realize, right? I think we've gotten away from solving true customer problems at the end of the day. And we are more, we we tend, a lot of these vendors tend to value themselves based on what they can do with the latest hype cycle, right? And as I was explaining, one of the things I think I've really realized about this whole being able to look back over the last 30 years is that there's this hype cycle. Vendors take it, they try to maximize, and then there's the customer disappointment cycle because the hype never paid off, right? So then the industry has to come up with the next hype, right? In order to recover from that disappointment cycle, right? And I think the example I always use is analytics, right? First we had applications, right? Then, the whole analytics capability came along. Everybody bought analytics companies, right? That was going to save the world. That was going to make applications smarter, right? But it didn't fucking happen, right? And so then customers got disappointed, right? Because they realized what they were sold wasn't going to ever happen, right? So then the industry figured, oh, now we need something new. So then what was it? Business intelligence. Now we're going to have business intelligence, and we're going to have voice, and we're going to have all these things. And, and guess what? It happened again, the hype and then the crash, right? And so then what comes along? Now we have Gen AI. Gen AI is the new toy on the block, right? But I think we're already starting to see that the hype is coming down very quickly, and the disappointment is starting to set in, right? And you hear it from even companies who are talking about the fact that, yeah, there's some good things, but it's not really panning out the way they thought it was going to pan out, right? And so now we are again, but I think that's because this is why I think when you're on the outside and you can look at it, you can say, like, why is this? Right. Well, it's because we never really took advantage of those things. We never completed what we knew was possible, but we never did it. And I think in a lot of companies, it was never done because it was just too fucking hard to do. If you think about analytics, if you remember the whole hype about the closed loop analytics, right? Where the analytics were able to diagnose or come up where there was problems, and then being able to have workflows that could then trigger the actions that would take that whole manual piece out of it. But it never happened. Never happened. Right. I mean, and so, I think that's the good thing of when you're not in the daily grind of having to build this stuff, you can take a step back and you can look and you can see, there was a lot of good things that were done in this industry, but there was a lot of bad things that were never fully came to fruition because of a lot of reasons. One is, look, and part of it is the financials, right? Because you have this pressure from Wall Street once you become a public company, and from investors and stuff. But, some of that stuff that really should have been done was very hard. It was very hard to do, and it's costly to do at the end of the day. And it's a lot of companies would rather have that quick win, right? Where you can go out, hit the quick win, drive your revenue, right?
Talk about it, brag about it.
Yeah, and do all the hype and the marketing and everything else. And then, but the reality is I actually believe that this industry has failed customers at the end of the day.
Yeah, so given all that,
I don't think we've really done what we could have done to solve customer problems at the end of the day, to make businesses run more effective, more efficient, right? I think, we've done some good things, but I truly believe that we failed in a lot of ways. And I think it's because, change is tough. And when you're a big company and you're on a roll, to take a step backwards and to start to rethink, right? How would you do it differently now, right? How could you change the industry now? how could you make it so that customers really could run their businesses much more effectively and efficient than what they are today? That takes a lot of courage for a company to take that step and to do that. And I think that's the problem we have is the almighty dollar at the end of the day drives everything.
Mm-hmm.
And it drives how vendors work. I think it drives how vendors react. I mean, look, we've seen a lot of that, right? You've seen this whole thing about, work remote, get your ass in the office, work remote, get your ass in the office, right? It's like, it's because the dollar drives that at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Right. And leadership, I think, look, one of the things that I've learned about leadership over the years, and look, being a true leader is really tough at the end of the day. Sticking to your guns, sticking to your premises, protecting your people, taking the heat, and really, being able to walk away from the job when you know that you can't, right? And not throw your people under the bus is a hard thing to do.
Yeah.
Right. I've done it. And I can tell you, look, it's not easy, but I think it all comes down to leadership at the end of the day. Right. And I think, a lot of leaders who I believe, who I looked up to for years, right? I think, the fact that they could rethink their businesses, right? People say a lot of things about Tom Siebel, but look, it takes a lot of courage to go to that consumption model, to change your business and change your, right? And I think, he's always been a true entrepreneur, right? He's always taken on tough challenges and I think, the problem with leadership is that I think people get too comfortable and they don't, they don't want to do the hard stuff anymore, right? Because it's costly. It's going to cost money. It's going to, you're going to have to, if I was looking at a Salesforce right now, right, what Salesforce would have to do is they'd almost have to start a separate company to disrupt themselves, and not with the same people who built the first set of products. They'd have to do it. They'd have to do it with new people. And, and that was our mistake at Siebel. We realized that we needed to disrupt ourselves. Unfortunately, we decided to do it with the same people who built the first products. And that was a mistake, right? And others have made that mistake. Oracle's made that mistake. I know SAP has made that mistake, right? But if you really want to disrupt yourself, then you almost have to start a separate company with new people who are disconnected from what you're doing.
All right. So I got to ask you, so what if you were presented that kind of opportunity at one of these money companies that, have the resources, have all the money, have, they give you the autonomy to say, all right, we need this. We want you to do this. You have all autonomy to do what you need to do in order to disrupt ourselves, because we know it has to be done. Would you take that kind of opportunity at this point?
Dude, I'm going to be 68 years old this year.
And you got that beautiful landscape behind you.
I have paid my dues in this industry. Working 7 days a week, 20 hours a day, year in, year out. I can tell you that, look, I would love to advise on that, but taking on a full-time thing like that, nah, absolutely. For me, it would be a tough thing to do. Plus, I sort of enjoy my independence and being able to look at things differently nowadays, right? But I do believe there's a lot of talented people out there, if they were presented that option, could do it at the end of the day. Plus, the other reason for me is I'm too tainted by all this. I've built too much of what's already in existence. Even though, yes, can I think differently about it? And I do, it would be very hard, because I would tend to fall back on old patterns, right? That I know work, right? And I think that's the problem. You can't have that, right? If you're gonna disrupt this thing, then you have to be able to think differently. You can't be tainted by having this baggage that comes with you, because I have a lot of baggage from this industry that that I carry, right? And so I think that's why you need new people who haven't been tainted by this, but can be presented with a problem and can look at that problem in a very different way, who have a good grounding on new technology and being able to then, build an application in a very different way, right? Than what I would do it, right? Because I would fall back on old patterns. It's part of who we are at the end of the day. You can't totally throw that out, right? But that's why you need new people. You need these young, really super intelligent people that are coming out who really understand AI, right? And not that just Gen AI, but understand all the aspects of AI and what's possible and what can be done. And they're not inhibited by what they think can't be done, right? That's the cool thing about it. And if you look at what's happened in like some of the medical breakthroughs or the manufacturing breakthroughs, it's been by people who they have no limits to what they can think about and what they can do, right? It's pretty amazing, right? Even when you look at some of this cool stuff like these automated hotels that are being built, right? I mean, if you think about that, right, the whole reimagination of that stuff, right, is pretty cool at the end of the day.
Yeah. And I love that point about people who don't have built-in limitations that come with the experiences that we've had over the last couple of decades. They don't have those things clouding their judgment or saying, well, you can't do that, because they can actually do that because they don't have anything telling them that they can't do it.
That's right.
Yeah.
They don't have the limits, right? They don't have those things. And by the way, they're not thinking about the almighty dollar at the end of the day. They're thinking about how they're going to change the world and how they're going to do something so differently, right? And they're not thinking of the financial aspect of it at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And I think that's why there's been so many breakthroughs in the medical side using AI, because they're not thinking about the dollar advantage of it. They're thinking about the good it can do, right? For society, for people, and I think that's what we've lost in our industry. I really believe we've lost that,
Yeah. I think that's partially because, you have shareholders that you have to answer to, and you have, activist investors.
It's absolutely true.
Yeah.
And then, you look at a company like Zoho who doesn't have that, right? And look, I know that some people, I listen to Ray's thing about asymmetrical advantage and all that. I love Ray to death, but you can't compare. I think when you use a term like asymmetrical advantage, you have to be very careful, right? Because you have to look at segment. You have to look at a lot of different factors that play in there, right? Zoho can do what they do because of a different reason, right? Because they're structured differently. They think differently. They don't have the cost structure that other companies have at the end of the day. And I think you have to really look at all that, right? They don't have that pressure on them for the revenue that other companies have at the end of the day. And so I do think, there are some advantages when you're a private company and you want to do good for the world, right? You can think differently and do things differently. You can take risks that others can't take, right? You can take 3 years to build a piece of a platform until you get it right, because there's no pressure on you at the end of the day, right? So I do, look, I do think at some juncture AI will become a critical factor, but I think we're still far away from that until we learn how to use our imaginations better in this industry to build things. I think we're not going to see the advantages that AI can actually offer in this industry.
Yeah. I'll leave it at that because I totally agree. Right now there's tunnel vision. You got to make it fit in the tunnel, and
That's right.
there's so many things broader than the tunnel. But right now, that's the focus. And until that change, I think, we're going to be kind of stuck in this rut for a little while. But this has not been a rut, man. This has been great. I really appreciate you doing this, taking time from that view. Once again, I don't know if I would do that if I were you. Oh, by the way, we got a nice comment here. It's always good to hear. Absolutely. Yeah, it's always good to hear that. Do you know John Suarez, David?
Very, very well. He's a great guy.
Awesome.
And a shout out to him. I was thinking about his wife the other day when I saw Cheez-Its got bought by a
I guess there's a story behind that.
there's a big story behind that.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Bob. And if you want to come back before you come off official hiatus for No BS with Bob, you're always welcome. And I don't know, maybe I'll even run into you at an event or two or somewhere down the line. Are you going to CCE this year or?
Nah, I tried not to go to any of those things unless they're my trips nowadays are to Disneyland and Paris and other,
Yeah, that kind of beats going to industry events there. So, all right. Well, good luck.
Having tea parties with my 4-year-old.
Hey, those are some of the best parties, I'm sure, man. But enjoy that. Enjoy the Bills. Hopefully, they'll do good this year. Because I definitely do not want them to fall behind the Pats at any point in time in the year.
Absolutely not. Hey, man, thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
All right. Thanks to everybody out there. And I will see you, I guess, on Thursday with CRM Players. Thanks
Perfect.
again.